Hello, everyone. We'll begin the webinar in a few minutes to allow more attendees to log in. Thank you for your patience. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Please note that you will be muted throughout the webinar, but if you have any questions or experience any technical difficulties, please type your question into the chat window. And all Q&A will be answered and read aloud as time allows towards the end of the presentation. Great, so let's get started. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome and thank you for participating in the Changing Behavior Frameworks and Approaches to Strengthen BOP Markets webinar series. The Alliance is very pleased to collaborate with our partners, Practical Action, BOP Innovation Center, and Hystra to discuss and share insights, learnings, and successful case studies of changing behavior around the purchase and adoption of household products among BOP consumers. My name is Kavanaugh Livingston, and I am a Senior Associate for Partnerships at the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. In today's webinar, Nick van der Velde from the BOP Innovation Center and Fiona Lamb of the Stockholm Environment Institute, or SEI, will explore the psychology behind decision-making while sharing learnings from behavior change campaigns developed by both large and small companies. Fiona will also share findings from a research initiative to understand more about behavior and choice in relation to the uptake of clean cook stoves in Africa. This webinar is part of a three-part series that is an initiative of the Global Distributors Collective, or the GDC. The GDC is a consortium of organizations led by Practical Action that is working to strengthen and scale the capacity of last-mile distributors to reach the world's poor with life-saving and life-changing products. Throughout this series, we will explore specific frameworks, approaches, and the role of practitioners, enterprises, researchers, and market builders in transforming consumer product markets and household outcomes. This transformation can happen by empowering consumers with actionable information and enabling sustainable behavior change. Before we move into the main discussion, I will hand over the presentation to my colleague, Julie Ipe, the Alliance's Director for Demand and Behavior Change, who will provide a quick overview of the behavior change communication programs that the Alliance has supported to date. Julie? All right. Please stand by. I'm trying to get Julie to unmute her
Okay.
audio. Perfect. Okay, go for it.
Great. Sorry about that. Thanks, Kavanaugh, for the introduction, and thanks everybody for joining today. We hope you'll find this series useful and that you'll get some good insights and inspiration for your own work. So before we kick off the main presentation, I just wanted to provide a really quick overview of the Alliance's BCC program as a bit of context for the series. So as the Alliance, and hopefully you all are familiar with the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, but in short, our goal is to create a sustainable market for clean cook stoves and fuels. And so the first few years of our work was really focused on the supply side and making sure that there was a robust supply of clean stove and fuel products, and as well as creating an enabling environment for the market. So this is a lot of our work around standards, a lot of research that we've supported, et cetera. And it wasn't really until 2015 that we started to focus more on the demand side, which is, of course, another really important piece of this puzzle. And as as a global alliance, we of course are not selling any particular product. So we're not talking about very traditional product marketing here, but rather how do we raise demand and awareness of these products more broadly? And so our approach has always been about using communication to raise awareness about the sort of concept of clean cooking and the options that are available, and really importantly to motivate people to prioritize these products, to prioritize clean cooking, of course, and to continuously use the stoves and fuels once they're in the home. So we set up our program with the overall goal of reaching people, of course, with messaging about clean cooking so that they have the information they need to make a choice about which particular brand or product or fuel is right for them. But our goal is also to build the evidence base on what's working and what's not working, and motivating people to purchase and use clean cook stoves and fuels. So we've supported 6 interventions to date. So we had a couple of pilots in 2016 in Guatemala, Ghana, Uganda, Bangladesh, and right now we have scaled interventions going in Nigeria, Kenya, and Bangladesh. These have reached close to 20 million people, which is really great. And we're also conducting an evaluation of these efforts, so we'll be able to share those results when we have them with all of you. So again, spreading the information about what we have found in terms of what's worked and what's not worked. And then of course another important piece of our efforts to share knowledge is hosting webinar series like these. So just really quickly, here's just a little flavor of some of the campaigns that we've been supporting. Kavanaugh, can you move? Thank you. So in Kenya, we have a reality TV show called Shamba Chef that aired from September of December of last year and was quite successful. We sustained about 3 million viewers per week, so we're very excited about that and to see what the results are there. We're also doing some community-based work in Kenya under the Upishi DG campaign. In Nigeria, we have Upgrade to Gas, which is all about driving people's aspirations to switch to LPG. And then we have our Modern Kitchen campaign in Bangladesh, which involves a lot of intensive one-on-one sessions. So we're testing a range of approaches and channels to see what works and what doesn't work. Next one, Kavanaugh. And so I encourage you to check out our website to find materials related to these campaigns. You can watch full episodes of Shamba Chef. You can listen to radio programming that we've done, etc. And we've also been collecting resources and materials from other campaigns that have been conducted in the clean cooking sector. So encourage you to seek those out. Again, this is on our BCC Resource Hub, which is on our website. And of course, we're always interested in gathering more materials. So if you have some interesting campaign materials or reports or research, we'd love to have those. So do submit those to us. You can send them to knowledge@cleancookstoves.org. So with that, I think I'll hand things over to Nick to get us started on the main presentation. So thank you all for your attention.
Great. Yeah, I'm happy to. Oh, whoop. Sorry, I'm just switching screens here.
Pardon me. Some technical difficulties. I'll go ahead and switch the presentation. All right. Okay. Apologies for that. Nick, I think you should be all set.
Yes, we're back. Great. Yeah, so my name is Nick van der Velde. I work at the BOP Innovation Center, primarily on marketing and distribution. I will talk a little bit about behavior change today. And the presentation has 3 different parts. I'll talk a little bit on the behavior challenge, defining your behavioral challenge. Secondly, on the types of behavior interventions that you could apply in your campaign. And thirdly, on how to build your behavior change campaign. Maybe just a little bit about the BOP Innovation Center. We're a foundation in the Netherlands. We do quite some work in Africa and in Asia, especially on marketing and distribution, and on topics related to nutrition, energy, a little bit on wash and also on waste. And we work with both non-profit and profit companies. And one of the things that I want to show today also at the end of the presentation is a case from practice that we did together with Unilever. So I think what I try to do here is, of course, I cannot give you a silver bullet on behavior change since it's such a complex topic, but I will share some of the models and frameworks that we use to build behavior change campaigns and give you some cases from practice. I'll try to squeeze this presentation in 15 minutes, so let's get started. So the first part of the presentation that I wanted to talk about was defining your behavior change challenge. Now, this overview might look rather simple, but we do realize more and more how important it is to get a very clear picture of the current behavior of your target group, and defining the desired behavior and trying to analyze what are the barriers in between. So when you look at the current behavior of your target group or customer, it's like, first of all, do you have a really clear picture of who these people are? Who is your target group? What are they currently doing, and when do they do it? And as I said, we spend quite some time on really trying to understand our target group and their current behaviors, and making sure that before you actually start thinking of campaigns and changing people's behavior, you map that out. Then secondly is that you define the desired behavior. What do you want them to do, and when do you want them to do it? And here it can be helpful to try to be a bit specific. So if you take an example from on nutrition, for example, instead of saying we want people to consume more fruit, instead make it like we want people to consume 1 piece of fruit in the morning with their breakfast, or bring 1 piece of fruit to school, something like that. Once you have defined the current and the desired behavior, then try to analyze what are the barriers in between. Is it what restricts people on switching their behavior? Is it time, money, physical effort, or mental effort? Does the behavior maybe lead to sort of social deviance that might restrict them to adopting this new behavior, or is it simply not in their routine? So this is the first part that I wanted to discuss about, and something we always incorporate when building behavior change campaigns. The second part that I wanted to talk about is, can you map out different interventions that you could apply in your behavior change campaigns? And then especially the part of ability is important. When you think about increasing people's ability to adopting new behavior, for example, if you think about time, like, can you help your customer or target group to reduce the time involved in adopting this new behavior, or maybe the money involved or the cost involved of adopting this new behavior? Or can you organize certain things that minimize the social deviance, reduce the mental or physical effort, make it easy to adopt this new behavior, or try to identify certain routines that they currently have, maybe where you can connect your new type of behavior towards. So these are on the ability side of things. And then secondly, you could think of triggers and otherwise on motivators that could actually help to build a campaign around. Now, the third part of the presentation is a model that we use when we actually start designing the actual campaign. It's called the 5 levers of change. It's a 5-step model that I think was originally developed by Unilever. And what we do is that we basically start ideating on these 5 different elements. And what is important, or what we find important, is that we try to make sure that we integrate these 5 steps when building a campaign. So these 5 steps are making it understood, make it easy, make it desirable, make it rewarding, and making it a habit. So when you talk about making it understood, is really about, does your customer target group really know why he or she should change the behavior? What are the benefits of the risk of their current behavior? Make it easy is, of course, making the message understandable, easy to grasp, easy to remember, or even making it fun. Then making it desirable is, can you somehow present your message in a way that it's desirable or interesting for people to listen to, or rewarding? And then fourthly, can you make it rewarding? So what could you do to make it? It could be, for example, a financial gain, but it doesn't have to be. It could also be maybe a reward in terms of social status or the way they are perceived within the community. And then the 5th lever is making it a habit. Like, what can you do to make this new behavior a habit in people, their daily lives? So as I said, the most interesting part is to think with me, if you work in a team, to start thinking on different ideas and see if you can integrate several of these ideas into a coherent campaign. So in a recap, these were the 3 topics that I wanted to talk about: defining your behavioral challenge, thinking of different behavior interventions, and the 5 levers of change in order to build your behavioral change campaign. Now, before I go to the case from practice, I wanted to talk a little bit about biases, because in order to understand people's behavior, it could be a bit interesting to study a little bit more about how people basically make choices in their daily lives. And we realize, or when you talk about behavior change, there are a lot of choices that are not based on rationale, and that's because people have a lot of biases towards certain choices they make. So, for example, to illustrate this, I can give you a very simple task, like, for example, simple math questions like 2 times 2 was obviously 4. But as soon as it becomes a little bit more complex, I'm pretty sure you can figure out the answer, but just takes a little bit more time. And there's actually, the theory is that people have 2 types of thinking: system 1 thinking and system 2 thinking. System 1 thinking is fast, automatic, frequent, emotional, subconscious, and stereotypical, whereas system 2 thinking is more slow, more effortful, but based on logic. And the theory is that a lot of people actually make most of their choices based on system 1 thinking and not on system 2 thinking. And if you just think about your own reality, I'm pretty sure we all know things like how much sleep we should have, what food to eat, and how much to eat. But I'm pretty sure none of us is doing all that. So also within our own lives, obviously, we do a lot of system 1 thinking. And it is interesting to think this through when talking about the topic behavior change. And an interesting resource to look at is the work of Daniel Kahneman, who did a lot of work on behavior change theories. And he writes a lot about the system 1 and system 2 thinking. So one example that he mentions is if I, for example, would offer you to get $80 today at the end of this webinar, or I give you an option to get $100 the next time you log into our next webinar, which is in February. What would you do? Would you choose the $80 right now, or would you prefer the $100 on the next time we meet? Actually, a lot of you would maybe prefer the $80 right now, and that is what they call in behavior change theories the present bias. So people have a tendency to prefer options that are in the near future than things that are far ahead. And keeping these biases in mind can actually help to understand this behavior change topic a bit more in detail. Now, we'll not go into detail on other biases, but there are several, and as I said, interesting to look into. So inspiration, the case I was talking about, it's a case that we did together with Unilever. And it's a project in Nigeria called the Bright Future Society. And what the project was about is that they realized in Nigeria, in a lot of areas, there's high level of iron deficiency, leading to all kind of causes. And Unilever said, could we perhaps try to see if we can tackle this problem by trying to change people's diet and improve the uptake of iron. And after a study, they realized that on one hand, people had a relatively poor diet relating to the vegetables they consumed. And they did consume a lot of bouillon cubes. So these are these small cubes you throw into the food to enhance the flavor, kind of salty. And actually the average consumption per household is very high in Nigeria relating to these cubes. So Unilever was already in the process of making an iron fortified bouillon cube. So they decided, can we somehow promote this new product into the Nigerian market and at the same time promote the consumption of green leafy vegetables, such as spinach and other local vegetables. Yeah, that could be an interesting campaign, but of course it would require to change people's behavior. So if we would take our own model, the current behavior was poor vegetable consumption and non-fortified cubes, and the desired behavior was more green leafy vegetables and the fortified bouillon cubes. So with the team, we ideated on several ideas. So I'll just show you now on what things we did on the different levers of change, the 5 levers of change. So the first step, make it understood. What we did was that Unilever was selling a lot of their products via sales agents. So they have a network of a couple of thousand of ladies that go door to door selling Unilever products. And they said, instead of only selling products, why don't you also inform people on the issues related to iron deficiency and what you can do to actually improve the uptake of iron and then the benefits it has. So these sales agents also became local change agents, promoting the uptake of iron and the benefits of their fortified cubes. Secondly is that they then asked also their consumers to register their phone number and become part of the Bright Future Society. And what they said is, we'll remind you with some messages on the uptake of your vegetables, and we'll also send you some discounts and those type of things. And actually a lot of people registered to that platform. To make it easy, what we did was they came up with a very interesting song and dance for the campaign. And this is actually one of my favorite parts, is that they didn't come up with a very sort of dull, boring message of eat vegetables and buy your cubes. But instead they came up with a song which was called Toss, Stir, and Crumble. So toss was relating to tossing your vegetables in, stirring was to slowly boil it, and then crumble was to crumble the cubes. And they had a very nice dance, you can search on YouTube for it, that they were playing and people were dancing on it. So it was a very nice campaign that was built around it. And that message was promoted also during cooking events in the villages. So here you can actually see one of these ladies also. I'm actually not 100% what she does, but they were also sometimes doing dance. They were going to different markets. They would go to organize these cooking events and carry forward this message. So easy to remember message and fun at the same time. To make it more desirable was that this message was also promoted with a very famous actors from Nigeria. I always forget her name, but I have it written here. Omotola, famous person in Nigeria. She was also endorsing the campaign. We also involved local community leaders promoting the message of consuming veggies and increasing iron uptake. And then also the people that were buying these cubes got a door sticker, as you can see here on the house, showing in the neighborhood that they were part of the Bright Future Society. So, of course, Bright Future Society, it sounds good, looks good, and people were actually sort of proud to be part of this community. So in that way, we made the message more desirable. Then to make it more rewarding, we came up with a loyalty card, as you can see in the bottom right corner. Very straightforward. You could collect stickers every time you would buy a box of cubes, and if you would have a full loyalty card, you get a bar of soap. So you can see the ladies here holding a bar of soap. And it was a very sort of simple way of trying to make it rewarding and building loyalty. But the response was very positive. 43% of all the loyalty cards we gave out, we got returned, and then people could get their bar of soap. So response was very positive and was relatively easy to build this campaign or this activity. So in that way, we made it rewarding. And then to make it a habit, of course, we had the sales agents that were visiting the households on a daily or weekly basis, promoting this message, offering the cube. So that's in that way they created demand, but at the same time fulfilling the demand by providing the cubes. But also the consumers were, of course, reminded by mobile. And again, this was not done in a sort of dull manner, like, hey, did you consume your cubes today? But it was built around this persona named Esther that really said like, hey, how are you? Esther here. What did you eat today? So we try to build some conversation with clients and really try to remind them of the importance of consuming the veggies and the cubes. So some results. Yeah, the campaign resulted in high levels of Knorr sales, which was of course good to see. Also, the amount of people registering to the mobile platform was very positive. In 3 months, over 4,500 people registered, and as I said, 43% of all the loyalty cards got returned. At this moment, we don't have like results on how the nutritional situation improved, but that of course would require a much larger way of assessment. But these are at least the results we have for now. And I have some more insights on the things that went well in the campaign. So, for example, they build a relationship with the ambassadors and the people selling the cubes. I will not go in detail here, but I also would like the things that didn't go that well or the limitations. So actually, the slogan that we thought was quite catchy, the Toaster Crumble, was not recalled, even though we sent it in the messages a couple of times. And then also when we did questionnaires with the customers about the messages, they said they could remember 5 messages, but actually 33 were sent. That also has to do that Nigerian people with phones get a lot of messages throughout the day. So there were some limitations that I just wanted to share with you as well. So a lot of content. In case you're interested, do not hesitate to contact me or the BOP Innovation Center, and we can always share more insights on the work we do. But I think for now I have to hand over the webinar to Fiona. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. Let's see here. I don't think I have control of the slides.
Okay, try it now, Fiona.
Yeah.
All right, one
You see my
second.
slide? Mhm.
Yeah, let me see. 1 second, please. Let me just get the next part up. All right, please stand by. I'll try to bring up Fiona's presentation. Okay, while we wait for the Fiona slides to make it in, and Fiona, feel free to go ahead and send those to me. Do we have any questions for Nick? As a reminder, if you have a question for any of the speakers, please type them right into the chat box. Okay, so it looks like we do have a question, and I'll pull that up. Okay, so we have a question here, Nick, that asks, regarding the campaign, what happens when you stop offering free soaps? Do people still come in for the fortified cubes?
Interesting question. So I think it is similar to what you would see in, not, let's say, conventional marketing, is that when we organized, for example, these cooking shows or came up with these loyalty cards, you see, of course, that there's a peak in the consumption of the cubes, which was always a positive sign to see that our activities did have impact. And then afterwards, when the campaign slows down, you do see that the sales goes down a little bit, but because the product was already sort of ingrained in their culture, and the consumption did continue after after we stopped the activities. So in this case, yes, the sales continues a little bit lower than when we were doing all those type of promotional activities. But yeah, I think also when building a campaign, it's good to keep on being engaged with your customers. So, and that is not much different than what would happen like in the Western world when you think of marketing certain products, right? So, yeah, I think that's my response.
Okay, another question, follow up to that, Nick. Does the community have any say in the design of the campaigns?
Well, indirectly, yes, because before we started designing the campaign, of course, we did our own research, so that was both quantitative and qualitative, and we visited. We did a lot of interaction also with the agents, so the sales agents from Unilever, to know what's happening in the community, what are the markets we need to go to, what are the communities leaders we go to. So we do try to pull in a lot of the, of course, local context before we come up with our idea or challenge. Otherwise, we just be sort of enforcing a certain campaign on people they might not be receptive to. So yeah, we make sure that we have a window of bringing in all the local preferences, insights, contextualities, and based on that, we then build a campaign. So yeah, my answer would be yeah.
Great. Any other questions for Nick? Please provide them. We are going to pull up Fiona's slides momentarily. Thank you for your patience.
And maybe then to bridge this gap until there's another question, like we would not maybe ask consumers, so how would you like your campaign to be organized? So we wouldn't ask those type of direct questions, because people often know when it comes to behavior change, not what's necessarily good for them or what works. So, but we know as marketeers in this case, the questions to ask, and then with that response, what to then design or build around it in order to make it a effective campaign.
All right, and then a few more on that, Nick. How many female and male, were there any youths involved in this campaign? And if yes, how did you engage them and include them in the entire effort?
Oh wow, that's a very good question, because actually we work in other sales agent networks as well, and let's say the recruitment of our agents is really, our Unilever's agents, of course, in this case, is a real challenge, and it's really interesting at the same time. So yes, there was youth involved. In this case, the agents were all female agents. And some of them were, let's say, within the youth bracket. Some were older as well, but we didn't, let's say, select specifically on age. We did have criteria on what agents should the criteria agents should comply with, but it was more related to, let's say, their entrepreneurial spirits and the level of commitment they would show on selling, and their sort of experience. So based on that, we would select, or Unilever would select their agents, and sometimes on referral as well. And by doing so, a huge amount of the women involved did actually fall within that youth bracket, and some didn't. So yeah, that's, I think, a little bit how the recruitment process went, and how we made sure that in the end there was also youth involved. And by the way, having, let's say, a more active attitude towards involving youth is something we're very much working on. But we do it with having criteria in mind as well, to make sure that, of course, it's sustainable both from our and Unilever side as well as the agent side. So we have to make sure, of course, that people sell for a while and make it a business worthwhile. And we can do that, for example, by proper training and so on. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Nick. All right. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone, as I pulled up Fiona's presentation, which I think looks like it's ready to go. So Fiona, take it away.
Great, thank you. So I feel like I need to go a bit fast now, but I'll try to be quick. My name is Fiona Lamb. I'm a research fellow at Stockholm Environment Institute, SEI. A very quick plug on our organization. We're an independent international research institute with a focus on doing research at the intersection of environment and development. We have offices in 7 countries, Kenya, Thailand, Colombia, US, UK, Estonia, and Sweden. And we work on a wide range of issues, everything from climate change mitigation, adaptation, energy access, food security, water, land use issues, you name it. At SEI, I'm part of a research program that looks at the factors influencing behavior in the context of technology adoption at the household or community level. So cook stoves is one type of technology that we've been studying. We're also looking at community sanitation solutions, mini grid for household electricity access, small scale technology to reduce post-harvest losses in smallholder farming. But today I'll obviously focus on the studies we've done looking at the uptake of advanced biomass cook stoves in Kenya and Zambia. So let's see if I can change the slides. Kavanagh, can you change? Okay, great. Okay, now I've gone too fast. So we know that many development-focused interventions involving the introduction of a new technology rely on individuals to change their behavior in some way for the intervention to be successful. We also know from behavioral sciences and other disciplines that there are many factors, cognitive, cultural, social, etc., that are influencing individual behavior, and these operate at different levels. However, where these factors are considered in interventions, they're usually studied in isolation, so they're rarely synthesized to provide like a full picture of how behavioral drivers on different levels interact and how they interact over time. So one of the goals of our work on behavior is to untangle these different influences and try and see where and when they come into play in the adoption of a new technology or change of practice. And this is really important if we want to identify areas where users of the new technology can be actively supported to adopt the change that's needed. So far, we've explored factors operating at different levels in society, from the household to the effects of peers and social structures that influence choice and decision-making related to technology adoption. But we really hope that our research can result in a framework useful for understanding behavior across different technologies in different contexts. We found in our recent cook stove studies in Kenya and Zambia, we found at least the World Bank's behavior change framework that they published in the World Development Report back in 2015. We found this really useful as a starting point for conceptualizing about how people typically think and make decisions. So Nick sort of referred to this thinking automatically. That's one way people think. So we take mental shortcuts and often avoid high effort thinking. We also think socially though. So we emulate the behavior of our peers and neighbors. And we often think with mental models. We have preconceived notions about how the world works, and we're kind of programmed to resist change. So given this kind of behavioral framework or model, having this in mind, we asked ourselves, on the one hand, what motivates people to adopt an advanced cook stove, and what support do different types of users need at what point in the adoption process to get the stove to work for them. So what did we do in these studies? Well, we used human-centered design methods to understand how people experience a new cook stove, from initial exposure to learning to use them to full adoption. Human-centered design is an approach to developing products or services or even systems that aim to make, and these methods aim to make the systems usable and useful by focusing on the end users and their needs and contexts and requirements at every step of the process. So we did deep, semi-structured, open-ended interviews with about 36 people that had purchased and started to use advanced cook stoves in Kenya and Zambia. We also used participant observation of users in their homes while they cooked or did other household chores. We used visual material like pre-prepared pictures, sketches, pens and paper to try and trigger responses to questions that can often be difficult to answer verbally. In Kenya, we studied users of the Philips pellet gasifier stove. Here we conducted 19 interviews with women in Kiambu County, which is a peri-urban area close to Nairobi, who had bought the stove. Almost all of them had started to cook on the stove. At the time of interviewing, they'd been using the stove for between 2 weeks and 9 months. Our interviews and observations, they lasted up to 3 hours sometimes, but the aim was always to sort of entirely understand every aspect of daily life and where cooking fit into people's lives. In Zambia, we worked with 2 private companies that were involved in selling 2 types of stoves. One was the Philips, but the other was a simpler, locally designed stove. We interviewed 17 households in and around Lusaka using the same type of interview technique that we used in Kenya. From our interviews in the 2 cases, we built a simplified user journey depicting the decision-making process that a user has to go through to adopt a cook stove. So the red dots, they would indicate key events in each phase of the user journey. The blue dots indicate where things can go wrong and where the user can sort of fall off the path to adoption. And the green parts underneath, or the green writing there, is sort of shows where missed opportunities to support the formation of a new habit were found. I'll go back one. So some of our key findings, it's hard to pack everything in here, but not surprisingly, and very much in line with the literature on cook stove purchasing and demand, the main motivating factors for purchasing a stove include the prospect of saving money and or fuel, the added convenience of using a more efficient cook stove, and then aesthetic and aspirational appeal of the stove as a sort of nice, shiny, new piece of technology. But that access to finance is absolutely crucial for all households. These stoves were rather expensive. They were in and around $100, so financing needed to be in place for the users. When it comes to using the stove, so once users have the stove inside their home, the decisive factor is whether they work well and as expected. So clearly motivations for purchase are not the same as motivations to learn to use the stove. So some people had abandoned it early on in frustration, or only were using it only for simple cooking tasks. Therefore, it's really crucial to have a system in place to re-motivate users when they encounter problems. We also identified missed opportunities for technical and social support to help the user along the way. For example, quick sales pitches, as opposed to letting people try to cook on the stove. Were often the way to sort of spread information about the stove. There was often no legible user manual provided with the stove, so people didn't have a way to remind themselves of how to use the stove later on. There was often no follow-up social support from sort of a trusted source or accessible repair systems if things went wrong with the stove. We also identified the following more or less broad types of users. We have the savers, excuse me. These were the ones who whose purchase was motivated primarily by saving money. It takes a while before the value of the stove is realized for this group, but they do seem to be aware of this and they were willing to stick with it, even if it was tricky to get used to the stove in the beginning. So for this group, it's important to have accurate technical information on the stove use, how to optimize use so as not to waste fuel, how to avoid accidents with the stove, and so on. And then we have the convenience seekers. Often convenience here was defined kind of individually in terms of, for example, saving time, not having to clean black pots, not having to watch the stove while cooking, and so on. And this group, we saw they needed a sort of relatively immediate improvement for the value to be realized for them. Otherwise, they tended to become quite disillusioned. They needed continuous support from day one and throughout the early phase of using the stove, ideally from a trusted source like a neighbor or a friend or a community group. But for this group, if they get a smooth start on using the stove, other benefits tend to become apparent later on, like fuel saving and health benefits. And the last group we identified, they're the folks who are attracted by aesthetic appeal or the newness of the stove. They're motivated by maybe the social status or the personal kick they get from trying something new. However, we found that the newness tended to decrease over time for these households. For this group, the immediate rewards don't necessarily motivate long-term use. So perhaps they don't need as much support in the early phase as the first two groups. But we noted that they often became excellent cook stove ambassadors, spreading information, and they really like demonstrating their cook stove for others and sharing their knowledge. So just to reiterate some of the key insights from using this user journey method to map out cook stove users' experiences, we can really see that by mapping the journey in this way, we see that cook stove adoption is really not a one-off event. It's something that happens over time, and it requires behavior to be repeated again and again on a daily basis. So this is a really big challenge to get people to do this. Also, it highlights the importance of managing expectations of different kinds of users. So really understanding what your different user types are from the beginning, and then trying to tailor the kind of support that they're likely to need at different stages during the journey is super important. And then finally, just to emphasize again how useful this method of mapping user journeys over time has been for us, and we're using it in lots of other projects now. It helps you to untangle sort of different events that people go through when they're adopting a new technology and sequencing them in the right way. Crucially, being able to pinpoint where support might be needed during adoption and for whom, so that your intervention can be really targeted. and effective. And also to validate, as a way to validate insights with stakeholders. Once you have mapped out in this really nice visual way, you can then show this user journey map to people that you've interviewed and other people, other stakeholders in the system, and get them to sort of critique it and add to it to make it even more useful and accurate. So those were the sort of highlights from the 2 studies that we did. We have an article published on this. It's open access, so feel free to take a look at that if you're looking for more information. We have a shorter brief for people who are more interested in the practical insights as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fiona. And thank you, Nick. Those were terrific presentations, and I hope the audience learned a lot of interesting aspects about adoption, about behavior change, and can apply it to their own work and their own organization. Terrific. So we have time for questions, and it looks like we have some terrific ones that have come in. I'm going to pull up a few to have our presenters reply to. So the question here, and Nick and Fiona, feel free to have the both of you take a stab at this. It relates to, is it possible to generalize how long a campaign should last to ingrain behavioral change? It's a great question.
Nick, do you want to take that, since it had to do with campaigns specifically?
Yeah, so I think what we, in the example I mentioned, as you could see also in the results, we were working with only, I think, about a 3-month timeline, in which we already wanted to see if we could impact sales and the uptake of the phone numbers for the community, and the impact of the bar of soap. So actually the timelines are quite short, but then of course, if you really want to see impact on a nutritional level, or like livelihoods improved, then you know the time of your intervention probably needs to be longer, but then also the whole impact assessment thing comes around to play. So if you would only look on, you know, can I change people's behavior in terms of the uptake of certain sales or the uptake of certain products, I think the timelines can actually be quite short, and you can work quite effectively on yeah, either launching a new product or launching a campaign. But yeah, if you want significant impact measurement, etc., then it probably is more about years. So it depends a little bit on what you want to achieve.
Could I just add something that I think that's what's really missing in the sector as well, is like a longitudinal follow-up, really like going back year after year for several years and really robustly evaluating what the impact was.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, and I think that is important. And at the same time, I also, you know, with the models that I also showcase, is that we have done this also with local SMEs. So like, let's say a Kenyan porridge producer that came up with a new fortified porridge, and can you know, at one neighborhood in one city, see if you really can improve the uptake of his new product, you know. And I think with limited resources and limited time, you can already do something like that. So that is the stuff I get really excited about. But you definitely, of course, need also those longer term projects to see if it's actually making impact at the same time.
Great. We have a question here that relates to, let's see. So we have an audience member who has made an observation that it seems many behavioral change campaigns in the cook stoves and fuel sector happen in isolation or very energy focused. Are there any insights, though, on the benefit of linking kind of energy related behavioral change campaigns to nutrition or health? So linking and integrating, kind of mainstreaming clean cooking into a broader health or nutrition oriented campaign. Any thoughts on this?
Fiona, any ideas from your side? I I'll think 5 seconds longer.
It sounds, yeah, no, I think it sounds like a very sensible approach to take an integrated approach to it. I'm trying to think off the top of my head where I've seen that. I have come across something. It could be folks at Winrock who've done something together with, could it be Wash Plus? Julie, maybe you've heard of this with Alyssa Derby. I think there could be a study that
Sure.
happened in Bangladesh even, or Nepal, where they tried to link in making small doable improvements in and around the kitchen. So not necessarily asking people to make a large investment in a clean stove, but to do smaller things that were, didn't cost as much and were easy to implement, and linking it to nutrition and giving their children different things to eat at the same time to try and improve overall household health. That's a very vague, waffly answer, but I think there's been a couple of things done. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it's either Bangladesh or Nepal. There was a good study.
Yeah, yeah, I can
think
chime in here.
Yeah.
This is Julie from the Alliance. Yeah, Wash Plus has done some research around what Fiona just described. So just thinking more holistically about what you can do beyond just purchasing a stove to improve the indoor air pollution within a home. So that it could be better ventilation, as simple as having an opening in your roof, opening the windows more often, etc. The other example that I would share is what we've supported in Kenya, which is the Shamba Chef reality TV and radio series, which does a really nice job of combining this concept of cleaner cooking with nutrition. So I encourage you to check out some of the episodes, but basically the overall premise is that it's a show about cooking broadly. So we talk about, of course, stoves and fuels and what the better options are, but we also talk a lot about nutrition. So what are the major food groups? How much should families be eating of each day? The importance of nutrition for children, especially in the first 1,000 days of life. So it's a really nice way that we've combined cook stoves and nutrition by, just talking about food and cooking more broadly. So that we have demonstrations where, the concept is that we're visiting real families at in their real homes. And so we have celebrity chefs in Kenya who come on and cook alongside the families, talk about the various foods that are being consumed and their nutritional value, et cetera. And of course, they're cooking over clean stoves. So that's an example where we've definitely combined and looked sort of beyond just the energy space. We've also in our sort of on the ground work that we're doing with PS Kenya and Practical Action in Kenya, we've also worked with particularly with PS Kenya because they work on a number of other health-related initiatives related to behavior change. We've asked them to mainstream cooking messaging throughout some of their other work around reproductive health or using bed nets, because of course they're reaching the same audiences that we're trying to reach. So why not talk about cooking as well? And that's something just more broadly as the alliance that we work on is sort of finding those organizations that are already reaching the same people that we'd like to reach and figuring out how we can get them to integrate cooking into their work. So it's definitely being tried, and it I couldn't agree more that there's a lot of opportunities out there to do more of it. So.
And maybe one note from my side is that what we do see is that, especially since companies now are building so hard on building their distribution networks, either with agents or health community workers, is that now, for example, we see companies in nutrition trying to see if they can combine their networks with, for example, the solar ones, and that solar are looking like, okay, maybe we can also sell cook stoves. So then it's really about leveraging your network of agents, and then also trying to really empower your agent to not only, for example, sell stoves or not only solar, but let that agent be the core of your focus, and let him or her be a really powerful sales and change agent locally.
Great. Yes, thank you for that discussion. Next question. I believe what they are asking is, in a case where you're supporting a campaign to switch and motivate customers to switch to another product. How would the approaches, especially Nick, that you've laid out, would they still apply if, however, there's already an existing product in the market that users are perfectly happy with, but instead you may need to compete with that? Do the dynamics change in any way, or are there other considerations you should keep in mind?
No, so definitely, I think most of the products that we have been involved with is already there in the market. So it could be like, if you talk about nutrition, it could be like a porridge or a bouillon cube or maybe a fortified dairy product. And with stoves, it's also a little bit similar, right? Like people might already have their source of energy. So I think we're always competing with a solution that they already have. And the benefit is that they might already have certain type of habits or customs to it, right? So if it would be a product that's completely radically new to them, let's say it would be like, I don't know, sort of vitamin powder, then customers might also be hesitant because it's new to them. But if it's like in a cube, which they already have been buying for ages and they know it and they know the taste, etc., then changing it to a fortified one is a less bigger step. The change is not that big. So I actually think that it actually makes the building a campaign slightly easier instead of making it more complex.
I would, not to be a downer on it, but I would argue a little bit that with cook stoves, it often is a huge leap from what people are using currently to something new, and not even a really sort of fancy advanced stove that I've just been describing. It could require using a new fuel or cooking your traditional dishes in a completely new way, and that can be just as big a step as using a vitamin powder for the first time, or in terms of the change that needs to happen again and again on a daily basis to make it a habit. Yeah, I think we need to be realistic as well about the kind of change that we can bring about and how long it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, Fiona. Maybe in the interest of time, we'll take maybe one or two more questions. We have one here, and Fiona, maybe you can also touch on this a little more as well. But the question asks, considering the fact that women typically are the main users of cook stoves and fuels, within your research, did you integrate the gender dynamics and of household decision making as well, as it related to wider community uptake? And if so, how was that integrated into your research into the consumer journey mapping, and what were some insights that resulted from that?
We had great intentions when we started out for doing a real deep dive on the intra-household dynamics, like what's going on between different members of households, and we never really got there for a couple of reasons. One, I would say, is that in both cases, the women that we spoke with, more so in Kenya maybe, had quite a bit of decision-making power and a certain amount of income that they had autonomy over. So we were working with a local partner that was supporting women's groups and providing microloans to women. So it was quite a special case, perhaps, and not really, maybe it's not the same in other households in Kenya. In Lusaka, we found that there was a bit more going on, where different people, depending on their situation, were making decisions if the husband was away working, or if it was there were several generations living under one roof. Often we had a bit more tension and conflict. Yes, definitely there's a gender dimension. I would say we want to do more work on this and the sort of power dynamics and decision making between men and women. What we're seeing is that if you're working with these, obviously women's savings and loans groups, it's a very special setup. But also that women, we found these sort of natural ambassadors that would pop up here and there, and that would go and talk about the stove to their neighbors, and without anyone asking them to. There were always women. It's women who are using them. It's women who are feeling the benefits of them, and it's often women who become strong spokespeople for the technology. So there's a huge resource to be tapped into as well, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, this next question is a really, I think, complementary follow-up. The audience member made the observation that it seems a lot of these behavioral change campaigns focus on women. What about a focus on men? And as a result of the more successful campaigns, for example, do men even take up cooking with an improved cook stove?
I can comment on that one, Kavanaugh.
Sure, go for it.
So again, using some examples from some of the campaigns that we've been supporting as the Alliance, we absolutely have tested targeting men because we're aware that women often do the cooking, and in some cases, as Fiona mentioned, they may have some purchasing power, but in a lot of contexts, they are not sort of the primary holder of the household purse string. So we know that we have to convince men as well, since this is a pretty significant purchase for a home. So in Bangladesh, I'll just use that example. What we've sort of tested is just this concept of what it means to be modern. So we had a sort of campaign where we screened a film in, they call it mobile film screening. So you sort of set up a screen in a courtyard so that people could watch it for free. But basically the storyline there was that you had one brother who was buying sort of like flashier clothes, and he was always taking the auto rickshaw and spending his money on sort of frivolous things because he thought that that meant that he was modern. And then we had the older brother come in and say, he was, there's a whole storyline, but basically he was coming from abroad. He had been working in the Gulf, which is pretty common in Bangladesh, and sort of came back and said, what are you doing? This is not what it means to be modern. What it means to be modern is to take care of your family. Our mother and your wife are here suffering over the stove. Shouldn't you be doing something for them? And of course, he convinces his younger brother, and this is what it means to be truly modern. So it's definitely something that we've tested. Again, we are still sort of in the midst of these campaigns, and as I mentioned at the very beginning of the webinar, we are doing an evaluation of them. So hopefully we'll be able to have some insights to share. But I would say that we are definitely trying to target men, and for now, based on our research, we felt that this sort of modern man angle would be the right one, but we'll see whether that's working or not. So just an example to share there.
I've come across in previous studies, I've seen examples of where campaigns try to target men and hook them in on the technology being on the one hand modern, but also like it's a new bit of techie kit that you can use to charge your mobile, or you can have a lamp attached to it, and in a way it seemed, and then I had interviewed women using these stoves who sort of said, well, yeah, it's a nice lamp, but I can't cook with it, or my husband likes it for charging his phone. But so I think, yeah, it has to be, there needs to be some caution, I think, in how products are sold to men, with the assumption that because men have the decision-making power, like that's the job done. Once you've convinced them that that's it. It needs to work for women as well, and it needs to, I don't know really what I'm trying to say, but I just think it can sort of, there's potential for it to backfire a little bit if the product isn't right for the whole household, and getting at that, knowing when you have the right product for the whole household is really difficult.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Fiona. I would definitely agree that the end goal would be that it's a joint decision that's made by the woman and the man of the home, not that, yeah, the sort of husband just goes out and buys some techie gadget that the woman doesn't even want. So that, I think that's a really important point.
And also that it's not sort of like convincing somebody. Yeah, we've also come across cases where women have worked really hard to convince and really sold their husband on, okay, we'll give it a try, we'll get this new stove. And then if something, as soon as the slightest thing goes wrong with it, the woman is blamed, and that can have repercussions internally as well for the household and for the women. Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, I think we've run out of time, unfortunately. But for those who are still remaining on the line and would like to provide questions to our speakers, please feel free to send an email to info@cleancookstoves.org, and our panelists would be happy to respond to any remaining questions. But thank you to the audience for your really thought-provoking and terrific questions. It's really helped enrich the discussion. To finally conclude the whole presentation, I wanted to just remind everyone that the Changing Behavior series continues into the next month. So on February 7th, Practical Action and a few last mile distribution companies will be sharing their insights and lessons learned for designing and implementing campaigns that aim to shift consumer behavior. And then the series will conclude on February 15th, where Hystra and Burn Manufacturing will explore mechanisms that help ensure customers' loyalty and motivate regular product use, which are all inspired by global best practices in the clean cook stove and fuel industry and beyond. All webinars will begin at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can register for all the webinars at the Alliance's website at cleancookstoves.org/events/. Thank you all again. Thank you to our speakers, Fiona, Julie, and Nick. I think our audience really enjoyed this discussion, and I think this is only just the beginning of a broader movement around understanding behavior change as it relates to products, and so that consumers and households can live better lives. So thank you to the audience. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you all next month. Take care.